Okay, so I guess let me maybe try and summarize. Your basic question is talking about how to maybe better study for the exams, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so for this exam and the set of modules, I think it's a little bit better because it gave you in more activities in Cogbooks. And on the exam, some of the questions will be the exact same format of that activities. They won't be identical to the activity questions per se, but like you'll get a picture of an organism and it will ask, what type of energy flux is happening. So I think this is maybe a little more straightforward than exam one. And also, I think on average, the first exam in most classes is typically lower because students don't know exactly what to expect as far as format. They've got to get a little bit used to the grading of the exams as well. So hopefully that taking the first exam gave a little bit more insight into that. And it'll be the exact same format where the first half will be multiple choice and true false questions. And then the second half will be a series of short answer questions.
Okay. And then the short answer ones, like I thought I did really, really well on the short answer ones. And I've had Chris Vito, my TA, and my other upper division ecology classes. And I guess I just kind of missed concepts that I thought I was covering everything that the question was asking, but there was really specific things that I think he was instructed to kind of look for in his answers when he was getting, great going through and grading. And I guess it didn't quite hit on those specific things. So I just, when you're asking the questions on the short answers, are we just like, how do we know we're answering everything? Because I mean, I guess I just kind of summarized it where, you were looking for key specific answers in the questions. I don't know if that makes sense what I'm trying to say, but
No, I think it does. And unfortunately, there's not like a formula to give, a great answer response to that. When the exams are written, they're given a rubric. And there is leeway, like I said. So if you've had conversations with your TA and you think you deserve more points and you can explain why, I have no problem you reaching out and having that conversation with your TA and they have the authority to give some points back. If the questions are confusing, I appreciate, you and any other student pointing that out because then they can be reevaluated. So not every exam question is written is necessarily a good question, so they can be given points back for that reason, then, potentially completely modified or just makes people writing the exams aware that that wasn't necessarily a good question, which happens sometimes. Or it happens that just more details were expected and there was a understanding on the student side potentially of what was to come from that question. But I think those conversations are good to have, with the TA, just so you get a better understanding too of maybe the depth that's expected out of those types of questions. And again, like seeing the answers. So I assume you've looked at like there's answers provided on the exam when you review it, right? You can see those.
yeah.
So do you think that seeing those helped your understanding of like what's expected from those questions at all, or?
Yeah, somewhat. I mean, I understood where Chris was coming from. I think I can't remember the exact question, but when it came up, I gave an example of, something that I felt kind of correlated, my perception of the answer. And I was giving an example, but it wasn't quite what the question was asking for in the rubric. So, I mean, he did give me partial credit for it because the example was explaining what the question asked, but, it wasn't entailing everything. So, I guess it's just trying to understand how to study for those fill in the blank, because you can kind of guess how the multiple choice are going to go from, making flashcards, going through some of the activities. They have the true and false on there. So the multiple choice and stuff, I feel like is kind of easy to study for, but for the fill in the blanks, I mean, are you, I just kind of assumed we were going for basic concept type stuff. So, I'm just wondering how to better study for fill in the blank questions.
It's a fair question. I mean, there's not going to be anything from outside of cog books that you're going to need to know for those. I would say providing an example to help expand your answer is a great strategy. If you want to go over a specific question, we could do that here. And if you don't want to over, the recorded meeting, no problem. You could, you and I could set up a Zoom meeting. This goes for any student. You can reach out to me and we can go over specific exam questions and, you give your reasoning, what your answer was, and I can, look at the answer given the question and give, the reasoning behind why it was expected, that detailed or that not as detailed answer was expected. So,
Okay. I can look at it and then get back to you. That way I know exactly what it is that.
sure. And if maybe if you want to start, send me the question, like which question it was through email, and then I can try to answer it through email if you want, or again, we can do both. I could look at it ahead of time through email, and then we could set up a Zoom meeting. And even if that takes 5 minutes, that's fine. We just find a time, go over the question, and just to make sure I'm both on the same page. And again, it gives me a chance to review the question. Depending on what it was, maybe I'll think it wasn't worded the clearest, and I can give additional points back, or I can give a more thorough explanation of what I was expecting for that answer.
Okay. I know last time it helped when you went through the key concepts at the beginning of the portion for exam 2. So I don't know if we can do that now, or we can just kind of go over the bullet points that you had pulled up last time for to cover in exam 2.
I did do that and did get the virtual office hours posted from last week. I posted them finally. I think it was yesterday, because there were some issues with Canvas, and I don't fully understand what the technology problem was. It wouldn't let me load the video because it was too large.
Oh, okay.
But the previous video is only 2 minutes shorter, so I don't understand. So I had to break it into multiple videos. So there's.
Oh, but you already posted that going over exam 2?
Yeah, so I did go through all of exam 2 key points. So like we can go through if you have other ones that you want to go over specifically,
Oh, no, I haven't
totally
seen
fine.
that one.
Okay.
Where are the videos at for those?
That is on Canvas now. If you click on the modules tab and then click on let me double check this. So you click on the modules tab, and there should be another tab for the virtual office hours. So it should be in the exact same place as where the video from the first office hours for exam 1 was.
Okay. And I didn't do that because I was on the live one. So I didn't go into the recording. So I'll go in.
Yeah, and they were, I thank everybody for their patience on this set. I usually post them the same day that they're recorded, but I ran into some technology issues that I'm still waiting to hear back from ASU Canvas, why they seemingly changed their ways that I can upload videos. Like I had no problem uploading the first video that was 129 minutes. And then this one had to be broken. It would allow me to upload a 34-minute portion of it. And then I just made a YouTube video for the last hour. And I don't have a problem that they're going long. Like, so I don't want anybody to feel like that's a burden or anything. Like they go as long as they need to until we get the questions answered. But hopefully this one will get uploaded tonight. But for some reason there's just some technology issues that I'm trying to work out with Canvas that I didn't have the last semester when I was teaching this.
Okay. Yeah, I didn't realize you already went over all the key concepts and everything. So I can go hit up that video and look at that for studying. I use Quizlet a lot, that app, because I can create my own flashcards and then take them with me since I have 3 kids. So I just kind of take it with me wherever I go. That way I can use them as electronic cards. It has like an e-learn function. So it does multiple choice at first, and then it does fill in the blank. And I put a lot of material from cog books in there. So I put, a lot of the examples that were given in cog books with the peppered moth and the lizards, different things like that. So I'm hoping it hits all the key concepts. So I'll go back through that video
Yeah,
and video.
that sounds like a great way to study for the multiple choice and true false, because they're not typically as in depth. So I guess one other thing I'm thinking about for the short answer is kind of when you respond to it, maybe think about the why, and even going through the key concepts. Like a big part is, you know, you can answer the question, but then ask yourself, why is that the right answer? And that kind of gets at the different multiple parts or the mechanisms of why that, and that's likely going to help you, you know, explain a little bit more detail in the short answer questions. If you
Okay.
understand what the answer is, in addition to why the answer is what it is.
Okay. What about the equations? Are you gonna have us like actually do math to know like area and surface and all that kind of stuff for the equations, or is it just the basic concepts that we're going for?
With the heat flux, you won't have to do any math, but you will have to be able to see the equation and know what form of heat flux it relates to.
Yeah.
You can get a multiple choice with like four of the equations, A, B, C, and D, and then it goes which equation is associated with radiation.
Yeah. And
So,
I've got all that down. I just didn't
okay.
know if we're actually gonna, it's probably just because I'm doing math right now too, as one of my
No, I mean,
other.
that's a fair question, but yeah, that's not as important to understand how to do the calculations. It's more important to understand what they represent. And it's important to know like what's in each equation, you know, which one is surface area more important for than another, and maybe why, or so
Okay.
knowing what the parameters inside the equation represent. That's as far depth you have to know those heat flux equations.
Okay. And then as far as fill in the blank, just, maybe understanding that how something would lose heat through conduction or something like that so that you can explain it. Is that kind of,
Yeah, you might get a picture kind of, if you look at those, I think they're think back questions they're called.
oh,
In the
yeah.
modules, they have, you know, like I think one of them was the video of the elephant. It might, you know, a good short answer question can be describe and contrast, you know, the different forms of heat flux this animal is exhibiting. And
Okay.
then something that we did talk about in the last office hours is when you're looking at, you know, which form of heat flux is this, think you can use kind of process of elimination, and you can use evidence in the video. So, or the picture, you might say, you know, is this animal in a warm environment or a cold environment? So in your short answer, you might say, given that there's snow in the background, this is a, you know, endotherm, this animal is likely to lose a lot of heat due to radiation. It's going to give heat to its environment. Or if an animal's in the water, you know, animals in water, there's a lot of surface area in contact with that water, so it's likely to transfer heat via convection. Sorry.
Okay.
Or if I think there was a picture of a horse that you could see its breath, so that's evidence of evaporation. So just pointing out the different evidence pieces in the picture, I think would be, you know, give you those kind of that in-depth like detail that would be looked for in those questions.
Okay. Okay. Yeah.
And also, I guess in that kind of sense, maybe, you know, to be safe, like say both ways, like this animal is gaining heat via radiation, maybe through the sun, because there's the picture is in daylight. So clearly there's evidence of sun, and the sun is a big source of radiation, but it's also winter, so it's losing heat to the environment. So it's, you know, you would get partial credit probably for one way that the animal like gained or lost heat via radiation, but radiation is a two-way, most of these heat fluxes are a two-way street, right? So make sure you answer the possibilities of heat going in as well as the heat coming out.
Okay. And then which type of heat going in versus heat going out? Because it might be
Yeah.
two different kinds.
Yes, exactly. It might be multiple. You could argue probably there's evidence for all four in almost any picture.
Yep. Okay. That makes sense.
And also, I'm not sure if on the community forum, somebody posted a link to something called Discord.
Oh yeah, we have a Discord group going on.
Okay, that's great. You know, I think I went on there a couple of times to check it out, and you know, I think it's awesome that, you know, this class is working as a group. There's, you know, people making flashcards on there that other people can study from. Questions are being asked and, you know, answered by each other. Okay, I just want to make sure everybody's aware of that too. And so the
Yep.
links on their community forum. That's a great way to study for these exams.
Yeah, and we've been going back and forth, and I've We really haven't had any questions posted on there in a couple of days. Maybe it's because everybody hit up the office hours and I didn't know that that had already been recorded. I think the only thing coming in is people are kind of worried about, the equations and if we're gonna have to do math or not have to do math. So I think that's really the only thing. It's just, I just want to make sure I do better on this exam than I did on my last one. So,
And one thing I'll say too is remember that if you just complete the Cogbooks modules, that'll give you 2.2 exams at 100%. So even if you did one exam that, wasn't something that you wanted necessarily score wise, that's going to be pulled up by a little over 2 whole other exams. So those can really help bring up the averages. And exam 1 is kind of, I talked about the results a little bit. They were essentially all over the place. A couple people got 100%. There were a good amount of A's, B's, C's, I think, and a lot of D's and F's. So there was a spectrum of grades. And I feel that's, unfortunately kind of normal for a first exam in a course. And then they kind of taper off and move towards an average where people get more familiar with the Cogbooks modules, more familiar what level of studying is required necessarily to do well, how to answer the short answer questions, maybe what's expected, what the exam formats are kind of like. And so grades tend to do a little better, I feel, after exam 1 in the class, in the past at least. So
okay. Yeah.
I mean, were there any questions you specifically had from the learning objectives that you wanted to go over? Or I mean,
The only thing for some reason that's confusing me, and I mean, throughout life, it's been pretty basic to me what convection, conduction, radiation, all that kind of stuff is that it's just kind of common sense. But for some reason, it's just been really confusing me for some of the matching activities that they had for, where you match the equation. And I have the equations memorized, but I guess it's just the concept of when they have the heat loss on there, which one is, conduction versus evaporation. So I'm just trying to go back through the activities to make sure that, I understand it. Like when the animal was first in water, I was thinking, oh, it's evaporation because, they're inside they're losing water because they are in water. So I guess it's just the concepts of them losing versus gaining heat with conduction versus radiation. Just those concepts I'm trying to make sure that I understand.
Sure. Do you want to go through one of the activities? And I kind of talked about this in a little bit of detail in the last video, but we can do a different one because this might be good review too. And this is what I was trying to mention earlier is kind of look for the evidence and I would argue, there's not necessarily one absolute correct answer for those activities. You could argue multiple heat fluxes for probably each of those photos. It's going to come down to which is the best answer. What has the most evidence for the most heat flux? So
Okay.
maybe I'll share my screen. And you see the pictures here, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And we can kind of go through what we did before, because I think this is, practicing this is really helpful. So this first one.
I think the one that confused me, honestly, since you're on that page, the one that confused me was farther down after modeling heat flux. It was one of, I want to say it was B, the activity modeling heat flux part B, activity B.
This one?
One down. So if you go up.
Oh, sorry. This one right here?
No, keep going up. Right below where it says modeling heat flux. There's 4 activities. Yeah.
Oh, the activities of modeling heat flux?
Yeah. Yeah. So I think it was, it was either A or B. It was whichever one had one that was actually wet.
Sure. And like the water one right here?
No, it must have been activity A. Try heat flux A. Yeah, that one was confusing.
Okay. So
It was just confusing because the horses, they're running, so they are evaporating sweat. So I kind of understood that one for evaporation, but I guess for the flowers, I was kind of thinking that could have also been evaporation because of the snow that's around them, because it's heat loss.
Yeah, and no, I will agree with that, that you could make the argument for evaporation probably in any of these pictures. It's just thinking of it in terms as what is the strongest amount of evidence, and then kind of I would recommend using process elimination, like ones that you're real confident in, go with those first and just ask yourself, is it this one? Is it, what is the strongest one? So I would agree, like by looking at these photos, these have horses that are sweating. So I would say they're losing heat via evaporation. There's strong evidence for that. I would also argue because they're running, they're in motion, they're losing heat via convection, right? So there's wind, they're creating their own like kind of wind current. Technically everything radiates energy unless it's in absolute equilibrium with its environment, and that's really rare. So you could argue, there's evidence for radiation if you just know basic, what radiation is.
I think that's why it was confusing me, because I'm like, well, really, it could be two answers, it could be three answers. And so I was trying to just figure out kind of how they were trying to piece each one of those together. And I got the horse one and the one with, the dogs laying under the shade, but the flowers and the bee, for some reason, that was confusing me. Why, one was, I think, radiation and the other one wasn't.
Sure. So what was your answer for this one? What would you argue?
So I think that one was, trying to remember what I did, but I want to say that one was conduction. So
I
the
would
K.
agree. And let's think about the why. Like what's happening? So you have two animals laying on the ground, right?
Mm-hmm.
They seem to be laying in the shade. So you could argue, there's a lot of solar radiation, but if the focus is going to be on these two animals, they're blocking some of that radiation. If it's hot outside, which you can make some evidence, it looks like it might be warm because it's sunny out, there's no snow, they're laying in the shade. So there's some moderate evidence that it's warm out. And these being, I think these are lions.
Oh, darn they. Okay.
Kind of hard to tell. I mean, it's a pretty small picture, but they're endotherms. So a dog, a lion, regardless, doesn't really matter. They're likely not transferring a ton of heat via radiation because they're probably close to the temperature of the environment. So you can maybe try and use that argument to rule out radiation. And then conduction, what's important for that to occur?
The surface area on the ground.
Yeah, exactly, right? So they're laying out like probably close to, just under 50% of their body is in contact with the shaded ground. So they may be using a strategy to try and dump heat to that cooler ground. So I would agree that conduction would have, that would be my, instinct to go there with the amount of evidence that we discussed. And then these two, you got to think about them a little bit. So this is radiation right here.
Yep.
And then the other one, I believe, is convection.
Yes.
Yeah, HA is convection. So if we look at some of the evidence here, the way I like to think about convection is the two strongest pieces of evidence for convection. Number one is water.
Yep.
Because then they're 100% surrounded by a fluid of water. And number two is flight. So like a bird in flight or an insect in flight. And I imagine, just looking at this picture, that the answer is for this insect is convection because it's in the air, so it's flying versus radiation. But there is other evidence for radiation, right? It's light out, so the sun is out, so there's a lot of solar radiation coming down. Its wings are spread, so it's actually increasing its surface area versus if its wings were folded on its back. So, there's evidence for both. Maybe I would say, convection might be a stronger argument because of the flight. But before I hit submit here, I would think about what's going on in this picture. So here you have, evidence of there's snow, so it would be cold. The flowers are open, so there's a lot of surface area for them. It's daylight, so again, there's solar radiation. So they're likely, since they're plants, they're likely, somewhat ectothermic, so they're likely fairly cold. But and that for the sun being out, they're more likely to absorb solar radiation. So I think,
Well, it had heat loss was what was throwing me because it's this primary source of heat loss.
oh, you know what? I bet this is not a great design by Cogbooks, I would say. So by process of elimination, I think you could get to this answer, but I think these are endothermic flowers. And that's why they're open in the winter. That makes a lot more sense. So these flowers, I think, are producing heat.
Okay.
So if you have
Well,
a-
and I know that that's what they were trying to do. So I was thinking, okay, well, radiation would mean that they're absorbing the heat in there, but heat loss was what was throwing me because I'm like, the primary source of them losing heat, not gaining heat. So it was, this example was kind of throwing me a little bit for what it was asking for.
That's fair. I think this is a difficult picture that, I didn't make the connection myself immediately that these were endothermic plants, but that makes sense. Having an open plant in winter, they have to be endothermic. And maybe they're starting to melt the snow a little bit here. So when you think of radiation, I think that the strongest evidence that they talk about is when an organism is a different temperature than its environment. So I think
Okay.
another picture they had was a bird in winter. So you have a warm-blooded animal or an endotherm, right? So and this is an endothermic plant, so it's typically warmer than its environment. And when they're warm in a cold environment, if they're out of equilibrium with their environment, so radiation is a strong source of heat transfer here. Um,
Okay.
Either in the winter, they might gain a lot of radiation, but I'm glad you pointed it out. It does, it says right there, heat loss. So if this was a bird, that might have been more obvious maybe to me and other people that were confused on this, or and just to double check that these are correct. Yeah, so those are the correct answers. Um, yeah, if it's an endotherm in a winter environment, and there's not a strong evidence of wind, I think, then radiation is kind of the go-to for that. It's not always, but I think that has the strongest argument.
Okay. That makes sense. Yeah. The other ones I did fairly well in the activities, but that one for some reason was throwing me just because of the heat loss.
Sure. Let's maybe take a look at, yeah, so maybe let's do this one quick if you don't mind too. We can kind of go the same process.
So the
So
bottom one with water is convection.
yeah, so that's always my go-to. If it's an animal in the water, convection is likely your best bet.
Yeah. And then if there's
Radiation.
sunning, then the surface area is going to be conduction, the cat.
Yeah, yeah. So somebody might say, well, what about radiation? It's clearly basking in the sun, but the surface area of, like you mentioned, of the cat with a presumably cooler environment, the ground, it's probably losing heat to radiation here, because if it's warm out and the cat's warm, the cat's in decent equilibrium with its environment, so it's not going to dump a lot of heat necessarily to the air. But if this concrete is cooler, the ground, whatever it's on, is cooler, which ground is typically cooler than the air, um, during the day, radiation's a good bet. And even if we look at this one, then if we would say, wait, sorry.
I was going to say, isn't that okay? Yeah.
Yeah,
I was like, I thought I had the cat for conduction.
yes, I grabbed the wrong one. Good call. This one for conduction, you could see the surface area is important, but it's got 2 feet off the ground and only 2 feet on the ground. So there's very little, contact with the ground with this organism. So again, it's not an endotherm. It's a lizards. We typically think of them as ectotherms. So it's in a warm, presumably warm environment. There's no snow. It's sunny. Lizards aren't really out in the winter. So it's likely trying to dump heat to the environment via radiation.
And then so like you said, if it's a multiple choice question and you're explaining both aspects of that, then so for the lizard, you would say radiation he's absorbing that heat by radiation, but by him moving, then, maybe convection because he can move.
Yeah, so if this would be like a short answer question that said, give multiple routes of heat flux. You could say, there's strong evidence for radiation for these reasons. There's limited evidence for conduction, and this is how it would go in the direction I think it would go. There's possible I think that's great. Like you said, if he's takes off running, he might then dump some heat via convection because of creating a wind current by movement. Yeah, so you would just explain, does it gain or does it lose heat, or possibly both, via the different heat fluxes.
Okay. Yeah, I'm just trying to wrap my head more around fill in the blank ones to make sure that I understand.
And for your reasoning, say for limited for conduction, is that there's not a lot of surface area in contact with the ground, so it's a low level of heat flux. Like
Okay.
that would be, the max detail. I wouldn't expect you to put in the equations, but if you talk about the parameters inside the equations, like surface area is a big one that's repeated, or water, fluid or wind and those kind of things.
Okay. Okay. That helps me that helps a lot. So.
Good. Glad that could be helpful.
And then you said that those videos were just if I go back in the modules, then they're in there.
Yeah, if you go click on the modules tab, click on the virtual office hours tab, the box should be updated, and it should have two videos available and then a link to YouTube. So which it just broke the last one apart. I just thought YouTube was maybe not the best, but it worked. So I had to get them up there.
Okay. Yeah, that works perfect then. So yeah, I think you answered all my questions. So I'll just hit that up and go through the topic points of exam 2 then. And
okay. And if you have more questions, feel free to, you can send emails tomorrow because you can take the exam, what works for your schedule. If you have time, maybe send them early. I can get back to them same day tomorrow, so you can see the responses I have before you take the exam. So.
And the exams are only going to be open for 24 hours. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Just makes it kind of difficult because, yeah, like I said, I got 3 kids and I work. So it's like, okay, where am I going to put my time? But so it makes it a little bit harder. Most of my classes usually do like 48 hours or 72 hours to take a test. So it's just kind of only having the 24 hours sometimes with other time constraints makes it a little bit more difficult. But
okay, and I appreciate that information. I wasn't fully aware of how other courses were doing their online exams, of what kind of time frame. My initial thought was, there's no reason to have it at a specific time since we don't meet, leave it 24 hours, it leaves some flexibility. But that's good to know that other classes are doing it for longer than 24-hour periods.
yeah, I think most of the classes that I've had so far, I've done ASU online for 2 years now, and most of them do right around 48 hours. Some do 72 hours, but most at least do 48 hours just in case you happen to be working. Like for me, I have 3 kids in elementary, middle, and high school. So, my daughter's got color guard practice at 7, plus I work and I'm trying to do that. So it's like, okay, so I'm going to allot evening, but then, for me, sometimes if I have a really long day because of my kids and then I'm doing a test in the evening, then that's not really the best time for me to be taking a test.
Fair enough.
So last time I was like, well, it'd be better if I could do it, the following morning, because then I could have, it just worked better for my schedule to do it the following morning, because then I could have had a good night's sleep and got up and had the rest to be ready for the exam. But, because everybody was a little bit different. I think a couple people in the Discord had a night shift the night before the exam. And so then they were trying to figure out, okay, well, if I sleep, I'm going to sleep until, 6, and then try to get up and, study one more time and then hit it before midnight. So Sometimes just having 48 hours, depending on what people's, work life and stuff is. Since most of us are unconventional students, sometimes it helps a little bit.
I definitely appreciate that insight. We'll take that into strong consideration for the future exams.
Okay.
Um,
But yeah, tomorrow I've got it all figured out, but I was just wondering for future if it was always going to be like that. Sometimes for me, I just never know what's going to come up with having 3 kids and working so I went through and tried to set aside all my exams so that I don't have those days of work anymore.
Sure.
Since-
I don't have a problem with that, to be honest, making them 48 hours. I'm going to email ASU, just to double check that, I wasn't fully aware I could do that. So it's good to know if other classes are doing it. It seems, I don't see a reason that I couldn't do it as well.
Yeah, that would be great if they're okay with that. That would be great.
I mean, as
I've
long
had,
as I don't, yeah, I can move them to the future exams like 48 hours and see how that works.
okay, yeah, that would
I
be
have
great.
had a few students email me about, exam days, trying, asking to open them up early, or, having reasons for extensions. And I try to be really flexible with that. And typically, ASU doesn't like to say work is a, valid reason for an extension, but I'm able to be flexible on that. So if something does come up with anybody's work, just keep me in the loop. Or if you have something for work, like a different project for your job, or you'll be traveling, just let me know ahead of time the best anyone can. And, I've been flexible with that and can continue to be, so.
Okay, yeah. That sounds perfect. I appreciate that. That's really great. So I appreciate your time and all of that. And yeah, I will hit up that other video.
All right, sounds good.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Good night.
You too.